A single-dad janitor made a mute boy whisper, unaware his cold, powerful mom was watching and crying. He thought it was just another quiet morning, but one fragile word, from a boy who hadn't spoken in over a year, would change everything. He didn't know someone was listening, someone who could destroy him, or save them both. But when one whispered sentence ignites scandal and stirs buried secrets, trust shatters. And the only man who could help the boy is the one being forced to stay away. What happens when the fight for a child's voice becomes a battle for truth, redemption, and love itself? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The early morning silence wrapped around Brook Hollow Academy like a soft blanket. The marble floors gleamed under the dim hallway lights as Eli Walker pushed his well-worn mop bucket down the east wing. His footsteps echoed quietly in the empty space, accompanied by the gentle squeak of the bucket's wheels. At 48, Eli moved with the measured pace of someone who knew every inch of these halls. His Army veteran bearing showed in his straight posture and alert eyes, even at this early hour. His janitor's uniform was clean and pressed, the name Eli stitched in simple blue thread above the pocket. He paused outside room 204, his trained eye catching a wobble in one of the student chairs visible through the glass panel. Pulling out his trusty wrench from his utility belt, he slipped inside and knelt beside the chair. The bolt tightened with a few quick turns. "There you go," he whispered to no one in particular. "All better now." Back in the hallway, the soft glow of dawn was just beginning to peek through the high windows, casting long shadows across the floor. As Eli rounded the corner toward the counselor's office, something caught his eye, a delicate paper crane mobile hanging in the doorway, its strings twisted and tangled. He set his mop bucket aside and stepped closer to examine the mobile. Someone had clearly put a lot of care into creating these origami birds, each one folded with precision. Now they hung at odd angles, their wings caught up in knots. Humming softly, Eli reached up to untangle the first crane. His large hands, calloused from years of work, moved with surprising gentleness as he freed each paper bird. The tune he hummed shifted from an old Army cadence to Amazing Grace, the melody barely above a whisper. A small movement caught his attention. At the end of the hall stood a boy, no more than 7, with serious dark eyes and a navy blue school sweater that seemed a size too big. Noah Park. Eli had seen him before. Always alone, always silent. Eli didn't stop working, but he kept his movements slow and predictable. "Morning, Noah," he said quietly, not expecting a response. The boy was known throughout the school for his complete silence. Selective mutism, the teachers called it in hushed voices. The paper cranes swayed slightly as Eli worked. "These birds got themselves in quite a tangle, didn't they?" he commented, his voice gentle and conversational. "Reminds me of the sparrows that used to nest in my mom's garden. They'd get their strings all mixed up too." Noah took a small step forward, his eyes fixed on the mobile. Eli found a paint stick in his pocket and held it up like a conductor's baton, letting it move slightly with the rhythm of Amazing Grace. The morning light caught the paper cranes, making them seem to dance. "There we go," Eli murmured, straightening the last bird. "Free as can be now." He was about to step back when Noah moved closer, his small face turned up toward the mobile. The boy's lips parted slightly, and in a voice as soft as a feather falling, he whispered, "Bird." Eli's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his expression calm. He'd heard about Noah's silence from the other staff members, how he hadn't spoken a word in the entire school year, communicating only through nods and the occasional drawing. "That's right," Eli replied softly, careful not to make too much of the moment. "Just like a real bird now." Noah's eyes stayed on the mobile, watching the paper cranes drift gently in the air current from the heating vent. His face held a hint of wonder. The usual worry in his expression softened just a bit. Behind the glass panel of a connecting hallway, a figure stood motionless. Vivian Park, Noah's mother, was an imposing presence even at this early hour, her designer suit perfectly tailored, her posture impeccable. But now her carefully maintained composure showed a crack. Her dark eyes, so similar to her son's, glistened with unexpected tears as she watched the scene unfold. Her mascara remained perfect, but her hands, clasped tightly in front of her, trembled slightly. Before Eli could turn and notice her presence, Vivian took a quick step backward. Her heels made no sound on the carpeted floor as she turned and walked briskly away, her shoulders straight, but something vulnerable in her usually confident stride. The morning light continued to strengthen, warming the paper cranes until they seemed to glow. Noah remained for a moment longer, his eyes following the gentle movement of the birds, before he too slipped away as quietly as he had appeared. Eli watched him go, then picked up his mop bucket and resumed his rounds. The halls were still quiet, but something had shifted in the air, like a door opening just a crack, letting in the first breath of spring. The staff break room smelled of burnt coffee and stale donuts when Eli walked in later that morning. Sunlight filtered through the dusty Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the worn linoleum floor. He reached for the coffee pot, grimacing at the dark sludge that had been sitting there since dawn. "Ellie?" Counselor Denise Martinez stood in the doorway, her reading glasses perched on top of her head. She stepped into the break room, clutching a manila folder to her chest. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Eli nodded, pouring the thick coffee into a paper cup. "Of course, Miss Martinez. I heard something interesting this morning." She settled into one of the metal folding chairs at the small table. "About Noah Park?" Eli's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "Just fixing a mobile," he said quietly, keeping his voice casual. "Paper cranes got tangled up." "Eli." Denise leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Noah hasn't spoken a word in over a year. Not to his teachers, not to me, not to anyone." The coffee pot clicked against the warmer as Eli set it down. He thought about those solemn eyes watching him in the hallway, that whispered bird that had seemed so small yet so brave. "Sometimes kids just need space," he said simply, wrapping his weathered hands around the warm cup. Over the next 2 days, Eli noticed Noah appearing like a shadow in different parts of the school. The boy never announced himself, just watched with those observant eyes. Thursday morning, Eli was tightening a loose doorknob when he sensed Noah's presence around the corner. Without looking up from his work, he held up his tool. "Wrench," he said softly, demonstrating how it gripped the metal. A pause, then the faintest echo, "Wrench." Eli kept working, his heart beating a little faster but his movements steady. He didn't acknowledge the whisper, didn't want to spook the boy. When he finished and looked up, Noah was gone. Later that afternoon, while sweeping the second-floor corridor, Eli named his broom in that same gentle tone. Noah, sitting cross-legged by the water fountain with a sketchbook, whispered, "Broom," without looking up. They fell into a quiet pattern. Eli would name whatever he was working with: cloth, soap, handle, and Noah would echo the word in his small voice before drifting away. Sometimes he stayed longer, watching Eli work. Other times he'd disappear after a single word. Eli never pushed, never asked questions, never tried to make Noah stay. Friday afternoon found Eli in the cafeteria, the low autumn sun streaming through the windows he was polishing. The glass cleaner filled the air with its sharp scent as he worked in slow, methodical circles. The weekend cleaning crew would be arriving soon, but he wanted to finish this last task. A small movement reflected in the glass caught his attention. Noah stood a few feet away, his backpack clutched to his chest. The boy's finger rose, pointing at a streak mark Eli had missed. The mark did look like a star. 5 uneven points stretched across the window. "Star," Noah whispered, his voice as soft as falling snow. Eli kept polishing, his movements smooth and unhurried. A smile tugged at his lips, but he didn't turn around. He just let the moment be what it was. A quiet gift on a Friday afternoon, shared between a janitor and a boy, finding his voice one whispered word at a time. Saturday morning, sunlight streamed through the small kitchen window of Eli Walker's modest second-floor apartment. The warm aroma of butter and maple syrup filled the air as he stood at the stove, carefully flipping a golden brown pancake. His worn army t-shirt had a small dusting of flour on the shoulder, and his feet were cozy in the thick wool socks Maya had given him last Christmas. "Dad, You still smell like floor wax and chicken nuggets, Maya teased, sliding onto one of the mismatched kitchen chairs. Her dark curls were still messy from sleep, and she wore her favorite oversized choir sweatshirt. You should probably shower before church. Eli chuckled, sliding a perfect pancake onto her waiting plate. Maybe I'm starting a new cologne trend. Eau de cafeteria. Very exclusive. Maya rolled her eyes but grinned, drowning her pancakes in maple syrup. So glamorous. I'm sure all the fancy Brook Hollow parents would love it. She took a big bite, then pointed her fork at him. Speaking of school, you seem different lately. Less quiet, if that makes sense. Eli paused, spatula hovering over the griddle. He thought of Noah's whispered bird and the way the boy's eyes had lit up ever so slightly. There's this student, he said carefully, pouring more batter onto the sizzling surface. He doesn't talk much, well, hasn't talked at all, according to the counselor. But he whispered to me the other day. Maya's eyes widened. Really? That's kind of amazing, Dad. She reached for her glass of orange juice. What did he say? Just one word. Bird. I was fixing this paper crane mobile, and... Eli shrugged, trying to downplay it. It's probably nothing. Dad, Maya said firmly, in that teenage tone that suggested her father was being particularly dense. A kid who doesn't talk spoke to you. That's definitely something. Monday afternoon found Maya leaving choir practice, her sheet music tucked under her arm. The late afternoon sun slanted through the high windows, creating pools of golden light on the polished floors. As she passed the cafeteria, she noticed a small figure sitting alone at one of the long tables. The boy couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, hunched over what looked like a sketchbook. His dark hair fell forward, nearly touching the paper as he drew with intense focus. Maya recognized him from her father's description. This had to be Noah. Making sure her steps were audible so she wouldn't startle him, Maya walked into the cafeteria. Hi there, she said softly, keeping her distance. Mind if I sit at the other end of the table? I need to look over some music. Noah didn't look up, but his pencil paused briefly before continuing its careful strokes across the paper. Maya took that as neither a yes nor a no, so she settled at the far end of the table. She pulled out her sheet music and began humming scales quietly, warming up her voice the way Mrs. Chen, the choir director, had taught them. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. As she started the descending scale, she heard it so faint she almost missed it. Noah was humming along, barely above a breath. Maya kept her eyes on her music, pretending not to notice, but her heart swelled. She moved into Amazing Grace, the song they were preparing for the spring concert, keeping her voice soft and gentle. Noah's pencil moved in rhythm with the melody. After a few minutes, Maya gathered her courage. I'm in the school choir, she said conversationally, still not looking directly at him. We practice every Monday and Wednesday after school. You can come listen sometime if you want. The acoustics in the music room are really cool. Makes everything sound like we're in a cathedral. The pencil paused again. Maya caught a slight tilt of his head, like he was considering it. No pressure, she added quickly. But if you do come, I'll save you a spot near the piano. That's where the sound is best. She began packing up her things, moving slowly and deliberately. I'm Maya, by the way. My dad works here. He's the one who fixes things. At the mention of her father, Noah's head lifted slightly. His eyes met hers for a fraction of a second before darting away. But Maya saw a flash of recognition there. She stood, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. Well, I should get going. Mom's waiting in the parking lot, but maybe I'll see you at practice? She kept her tone light, expecting no response. As she walked toward the cafeteria door, she caught sight of her father through the glass. He was pushing his cart down the hallway, probably doing his afternoon rounds. Maya gave him an enthusiastic thumbs up, grinning widely. Behind her, she could feel Noah's eyes following her movement, his curiosity almost tangible in the quiet space. The early morning light filtered through the tall windows of Brook Hollow Academy, casting long shadows across the freshly mopped floors. Eli Walker pushed his cleaning cart down the main corridor, pausing to adjust a crooked bulletin board. The sound of dress shoes clicking against tile made him turn. Principal Romero approached, his tie perfectly knotted and his silver-streaked hair neatly combed. Mr. Walker, Do you have a moment? Of course, sir. Eli straightened, unconsciously smoothing his gray work shirt. Denise Mrs. Chen from counseling tells me you've had some success with Noah Park. Romero's voice was measured, careful. She believes your presence has been helpful for the boy. Eli shrugged modestly. I just try to give him space, sir. Let him feel comfortable. That's exactly it. Romero nodded, clasping his hands behind his back. We've been discussing ways to build on this progress. What would you think about acting as a sort of hallway buddy during certain breaks? Nothing formal, just being available if Noah wants to walk with you while you do your rounds? Eli considered this carefully, thinking of Noah's tentative whispers. I wouldn't want to pressure him. Of course not. Just keep doing what you're doing, your regular tasks, but with an open invitation for Noah to join you. What do you think? I'd be happy to help, Eli said softly, as long as it's what Noah wants. The next day, Eli was fixing a loose doorknob when he felt a presence behind him. Noah stood there, clutching his notebook, watching intently as Eli worked the screwdriver. Morning, Noah, Eli said casually, continuing his work. This old door's getting squeaky? Want to see how to fix it? Noah edged closer, his eyes fixed on Eli's hands. See this part here? Eli pointed with the screwdriver. It's called the strike plate. Sometimes it gets loose. Strike, Noah whispered, so quietly Eli almost missed it. They fell into an easy routine over the next few days. Noah would find Eli during morning break, trailing quietly behind as the janitor made his rounds. Eli would name tools as he used them, wrench, pliers, level, and sometimes Noah would echo the words in his soft voice. On Thursday, they passed the art room where student paintings hung in cheerful rows. Noah tugged gently at Eli's sleeve and pointed to a wooden bench nearby. Understanding, Eli sat down, leaving plenty of space between them. Noah opened his sketchbook carefully, turning pages with deliberate movements. The drawings were remarkable for a 7-year-old, precise lines forming wings and feathers, each bird detailed with careful attention. But what caught Eli's eye was that every bird had some kind of bandage or cast, drawn with the same careful detail as the feathers. These are really something, Noah, Eli said quietly. You've got a gift. Noah turned another page, showing a small sparrow with its wing wrapped in what looked like gauze. He touched the drawing lightly with one finger. Hurt, he whispered. Eli nodded, his heart aching a little. But it looks like they're getting good care. That's important. Noah studied the drawing for a moment, then carefully tore it from his sketchbook and held it out to Eli. You sure? Eli asked gently. When Noah nodded, he accepted the paper with careful hands. Thank you. That evening, after his shift ended, Eli walked the familiar path to St. Michael's Church. The food pantry around back was still open, warm light spilling from its windows. Sister Agnes was organizing canned goods, her gray hair neat under a practical kerchief. Eli Walker, she smiled warmly. Here to help with the heavy lifting. If you need it, he replied, already rolling up his sleeves. But I wanted to show you something too. After they'd moved several boxes of donations, they sat at the small table where Sister Agnes kept her endless supply of tea. Eli carefully took Noah's drawing from his work bag. One of my students gave me this today, he said, smoothing the paper on the table. He doesn't speak much, hardly at all, really, but he draws these. Sister Agnes adjusted her reading glasses, studying the detailed sparrow with its bandaged wing. Her weathered face softened. There's a lot of heart in this picture, she said. Pain too, but mostly heart. He draws all his birds with bandages or casts, Eli explained. I've been sort of walking with him during breaks. Principal's idea. He whispers sometimes, now just words here and there. Sister Agnes reached across the table and patted his hand. God sends the right hands for the right moment, she said softly. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Brook Hollow Academy, casting warm rectangles across the polished floors. Eli Walker worked his way methodically down the main corridor, focusing on the brass door handles that needed extra attention today. His cleaning cloth moved in small circles as he buffed each handle to a mirror shine. The usual morning quiet had given way to an unusual buzz of activity. Staff members hurried past, straightening picture frames and adjusting displays. A group of teachers spoke in hushed tones near the front office, their excitement barely contained. Principal Romero had reminded everyone at last week's staff meeting about today's donor tour, but Eli hadn't expected quite this much fuss. "Remember, everyone," Principal Romero's voice carried down the hallway as he addressed a cluster of board members. "Miss Whitmore's generosity has made possible many of our recent improvements, including the new science wing." Eli kept his head down, focusing on his work. He'd learned long ago that being invisible was sometimes the best way to serve. The brass handle in front of him reflected his weathered face as he polished, showing the gray at his temples and the laugh lines around his eyes. The main entrance doors swung open, and a wave of voices filled the space. Charles Whitmore entered first, his presence commanding attention without effort. His tailored Navy suit probably cost more than Eli made in 3 months. A small entourage of assistants and photographers followed, along with several board members who hadn't already gathered. "The renovations look magnificent, Thomas," Whitmore said to Principal Romero, his voice warm and practiced. "The science wing especially exactly what I'd hoped for." Eli moved to the next handle, carefully keeping out of the way as the tour group proceeded down the hall. He noticed Noah sitting cross-legged in his usual spot by the art room, hunched over his sketchbook. The boy seemed oblivious to the commotion, his pencil moving steadily across the paper. The tour group paused near where Noah sat, as Principal Romero described the upcoming Performing Arts Center renovation. Charles Whitmore's gaze drifted to Noah, and his expression softened. He stepped away from the group, bending slightly at the waist to peer at the boy's drawing. "That's quite impressive," Whitmore said gently. "You have quite a talent, young man." Noah looked up, his dark eyes studying Whitmore's face with that intense focus Eli had come to recognize. The boy's hand tightened on his pencil, and for a moment, everything seemed to pause. Then, Noah did something unexpected. He reached out and tugged at Whitmore's sleeve, a gesture so bold it made Eli's breath catch. The boy's face tilted upward, and his voice, clear as a bell in the sudden quiet, carried to everyone nearby. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The words hung in the air like suspended glass. A board member to Eli's right gasped audibly, her coffee cup slipping from her manicured fingers. The ceramics shattered on the floor, dark liquid spreading across the tiles Eli had mopped earlier, but no one moved to clean it up. All eyes were fixed on the tableau before them. Charles Whitmore's familiar smile froze, then cracked slightly at the edges. His face drained of color, and he straightened up so quickly it seemed almost mechanical. Through the stunned crowd, Eli spotted Vivian Park approaching from the direction of the administrative offices. She must have heard the commotion. Her heels stopped clicking against the floor as she took in the scene, her son's hand still gripping Whitmore's sleeve, the spilled coffee spreading, the shocked faces all around. Vivian's transformation was subtle but complete. Her usual commanding presence crystallized into something harder, colder. Her perfectly made-up face became as still as a frozen pond, eyes glittering but empty, lips pressed into a line so thin they nearly disappeared. She stood absolutely motionless, one hand clutching her leather portfolio like a shield. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft drip of coffee from the broken cup. Eli remained where he was, the cleaning cloth hanging forgotten in his hand. He watched the ripple of reactions move through the gathered crowd. Confusion, shock, curiosity, and something darker judgment beginning to form in narrowed eyes and whispered comments behind raised hands. Noah, seemingly unaware of the bomb he'd just dropped, returned to his drawing as if nothing had happened. His pencil moved across the paper with the same steady focus, the sound somehow louder than it should have been in the strained quiet. Principal Romero cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Perhaps we should continue to the library." His voice trailed off as he glanced between Whitmore and Vivian, clearly unsure how to proceed. Eli stood rooted to his spot, still holding his polishing cloth, watching as the comfortable routine of the school day shattered around him. He recognized the tension in the air, the same kind that preceded a storm, when the pressure drops and the wind goes still. Whatever was happening, he knew instinctively that nothing would be the same after this moment. In his years of service, both in the Army and at the school, Eli had learned to read situations quickly. Right now, Every instinct told him they were standing on the edge of something bigger than a simple misunderstanding. The looks being exchanged, the barely concealed whispers, the rigid posture of Vivian Park, it all spoke of deeper waters, of secrets suddenly thrust into the light. The polishing cloth in his hand felt heavy, weighted with the responsibility of being an accidental witness to this moment. He watched as board members began to whisper behind their hands, as Charles Whitmore's assistants moved closer to their boss like a protective wall, as Vivian Park remained frozen in her defensive pose. And in the middle of it all, Noah continued to draw, his pencil scratching quietly against paper, creating his own world of birds and sky, seemingly untouched by the storm he'd just unleashed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the small window of the custodial closet as Eli organized his cleaning supplies. The familiar scent of lemon cleaner and floor wax filled the cramped space. His mind kept drifting back to the morning's events, the donor tour, Noah's whispered words, and the shocked faces that followed. Nadine, the head custodian, appeared in the doorway. Her usual cheerful expression was replaced with concern as she leaned against the metal shelving. "You hear what they're saying?" she asked, lowering her voice despite them being alone. Eli continued arranging bottles of cleaner. "About this morning? Half the staff thinks the boy belongs to the donor," Nadine said, shaking her head. "Never seen gossip spread this fast, not even when Mrs. Henderson's toupee fell in the punch bowl at last year's Christmas party." Eli's hands stilled on the shelf. A knot formed in his stomach, heavy and cold. "That's ridiculous," he muttered. Though the pieces were starting to fit together, Vivian's carefully maintained distance, Noah's isolation, the whispered words that had caused such chaos. "Ridiculous or not, it's what they're saying." Nadine crossed her arms. Board members were huddled up in the teacher's lounge like they were planning battle strategy. Never seen them skip their fancy lunch spots before. The knot in Eli's stomach tightened. He thought of Noah's drawings, those wounded birds with bandaged wings. How many times had the boy been hurt by adult problems he couldn't understand? "It's not our business," Eli said firmly, more to himself than Nadine. He grabbed his cart and headed for the door. "I've got the science wing to finish." But before he could escape, the sound of rapid clicking heels echoed down the hallway. Vivian Park strode past the custodial closet, her normally perfect posture rigid with tension. She didn't spare them a glance as she marched straight to Principal Romero's office and threw open the door. Even through the closed door, her voice carried. "I need to control this narrative before it spirals further out of control." Nadine whistled low. "Wouldn't want to be Romero right now." She patted Eli's shoulder and disappeared down the hall, leaving him alone with his thoughts and his mop bucket. Eli tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept circling back to Noah. The boy had finally started opening up, finding safe spaces to express himself. Would this incident send him back into silence? He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice Vivian's approach until her shadow fell across his freshly mopped floor. He looked up to find her standing there, perfectly composed except for the slight tremor in her hands. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice clipped and cold, "we need to discuss boundaries." Eli straightened up, still holding his mop. "Mrs. Park, I appreciate that you are trying to help," she cut in, "but I need you to keep your distance from Noah from now on." The knot in Eli's stomach twisted painfully. "I didn't." "This isn't a discussion," Vivian interrupted again. Her eyes were hard, but there was something else there. Fear, maybe. "Whatever progress you think you've made with my son, whatever connection you imagine exists, it ends now. Is that clear?" Before Eli could respond, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the empty hallway. The sound of her heels faded, replaced by the hollow echo of silence. Later, sitting in his old pickup truck in the empty school parking lot, Eli gripped the steering wheel and stared straight ahead. The afternoon sun had faded to dusk, casting long shadows across the dashboard. His wedding ring caught the light as he twisted his hands on the wheel, remembering the way Noah had started to trust him, how the boy's whispers had grown a little stronger each day. The connection they'd built had been real, fragile as a paper crane, but real. And now, like so many things in Noah's world, it had been crushed by adult complications he'd had no part in creating. Eli closed his eyes, still gripping the wheel. That morning, he'd been the janitor who helped a silent boy find his voice. Now he sat wondering if he just lost the only real connection that child had. The next morning arrived with a heavy mist clinging to Brook Hollow Academy's windows. Eli pushed his cart down the west corridor instead of his usual route, through the east wing where Noah typically waited. His movements were mechanical as he cleaned, spray, wipe, move on, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in his chest. Through the library's glass doors, he caught a glimpse of Noah sitting alone at his usual table, pencil hovering motionless over blank paper. The boy's eyes followed Eli's reflection, but Eli kept his head down, focusing on a stubborn scuff mark on the floor. Vivian's words echoed in his mind, "Keep away from my son." The morning crawled by. During second period, Eli methodically cleaned the cafeteria tables, timing it so he'd be finished before Noah's class came for early lunch. His daughter Maya's words from breakfast played in his head. "Dad, you can't just give up on him." But what choice did he have? The next day brought rain, keeping the students inside during morning break. Eli worked in the gymnasium, always staying just out of Noah's line of sight. He caught glimpses of the boy standing near doorways, clutching his sketchbook, but Eli forced himself to look away each time. The weight of distance felt heavier than his mop bucket. By Wednesday, the sun returned. During his morning rounds, Eli noticed Noah's class would have outdoor recess. He waited until the playground was empty, then pulled colored chalk from his cart. With careful strokes, he drew a small blue bird near the hopscotch squares, adding simple music notes around it. Nothing fancy, just the kind of doodle that might make a child smile. He was mopping the hallway when Noah's class filed out for recess. Through the window, Eli watched as Noah discovered the chalk drawing. The boy knelt beside it, touching the notes with gentle fingers. His lips moved, forming what looked like the word fly. Eli turned away, chest tight, and continued mopping. Thursday brought more chalk birds, this time 2 yellow ones sharing a branch. Eli added music notes that Maya had taught him from her choir practice. He made sure to be around the corner, organizing cleaning supplies, when Noah found them. The whispered word that drifted down the hall was brave. Friday's bird wore a tiny conductor's hat, just like the one Sister Agnes wore during church choir. Eli drew it before sunrise, adding a simple musical staff beneath it. Later, while buffing the hallway floors, he heard Noah's soft voice say, "Song," to the empty playground. The weekend passed slowly. Eli spent it fixing Maya's wobbly desk and trying not to think about Monday. But when Monday came, his hands seemed to move on their own, creating a small family of chalkbirds near the tetherball pole. These had different colored wings, red, blue, yellow, and green. He added eighth notes dancing around them like confetti. Noah found them during morning break. From his spot cleaning windows, Eli could see the boy's reflection. Noah touched each bird in turn, whispering something that made his shoulders relax. Maybe home or hope, Eli was too far away to tell. Days blurred together, marked by chalkbirds and distant whispers. Eli learned to time his work perfectly, drawing early, staying busy elsewhere during breaks, cleaning away the drawings before heading home. It became a silent conversation between them, speaking through colored chalk and quiet words. The other custodians covered for him without being asked. Nadine would signal if Vivian was approaching. Jorge would keep an extra bottle of cleaning spray handy to quickly erase chalk if needed. Even Mrs. Chen from the cafeteria would save bits of colored chalk she found in the teacher's lounge. 2 weeks passed this way. Eli maintained his distance while leaving small signs that someone still cared, still listened. He drew birds taking flight, birds sharing worms, birds building nests. Each morning brought new designs, and each day brought Noah's whispered responses. Friend, kind, warm. One particularly long Tuesday, Eli worked late into the evening, catching up on maintenance requests. The halls were empty and dark, except for security lights casting long shadows. His shoulders ached as he pushed his cart toward the supply closet for the final time that night. That's when he saw it. A tiny paper crane, perfectly folded, sitting in the center of his mop bucket. The paper was from Noah's sketchbook, the edges still rough where it had been carefully torn out. Eli picked it up with gentle fingers, turning it in the dim light. On one wing, in small, careful letters, Noah had written a single word, friend. Eli held the crane in his palm, feeling its delicate weight. All the words he couldn't say, all the distance he had to keep. Somehow this small paper bird carried the weight of both their silences. He placed it carefully in his shirt pocket, right next to his heart, and finished his rounds for the night. The crane's presence felt like a whisper itself, a reminder that sometimes the quietest messages spoke the loudest. Tomorrow would bring new chalk birds, new whispered words, new ways of saying, "I'm still here," without breaking any rules. For now, that would have to be enough. The afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Church, casting warm patches of red and blue across the worn wooden floor of the pantry. Eli and Maya worked side by side, sorting through boxes of donated canned goods while Sister Agnes checked expiration dates with her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. "Would you look at that?" Sister Agnes held up a can of cream corn. 2019. I swear people clean out their fallout shelters and bring it all here. Her eyes twinkled as she tossed the expired can into a separate box. Maya giggled, stacking soup cans in neat rows. "At least they're trying to help, sister." "That they are, dear." Sister Agnes settled onto a folding chair, her arthritis acting up. "Speaking of helping, I've been thinking about organizing something special. A Voices potluck at the church hall." Eli paused in his sorting. "Voices potluck?" "Mm-hmm." Sister Agnes nodded, her gray curls bouncing slightly. "Everyone's got something to say, don't they? But not everyone has the same way of saying it. Some sing, some write poems, some just need to share one important word." She gave Eli a meaningful look. "I thought we could invite anyone who's ever felt unheard." Maya's eyes lit up. "That sounds amazing! We could have the choir come too." "That's exactly what I was thinking." Sister Agnes smiled. "No pressure, just a safe space. People can share if they want to, or just listen. Sometimes listening is its own kind of voice." Eli sat down on a stack of boxes, thinking about Noah's whispered words, his careful drawings. "Sister, you wouldn't happen to be thinking of anyone specific, would you?" "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she replied with a slight shrug, "and sometimes through very obvious ones." Maya stopped arranging cans and turned to her father. "Dad, Noah would love this. He could share his art, or just be there. No pressure." Eli ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "I don't know, sweetheart. His mother was pretty clear about me staying away." "But this wouldn't be you approaching him," Sister Agnes pointed out. "This would be a community event, open to all." Maya's face brightened with an idea. "What if we let Ms. Thompson know about it? She's Noah's art teacher. She could pass along the invitation to all her students. That way, it's not breaking any rules." Eli considered this. Ms. Thompson had always been kind, understanding the power of creative expression in healing. She'd shown interest in Noah's progress, displaying his bird drawings prominently in the art room. That could work," he said slowly. "It would be her choice to share the information, and Vivian's choice whether to let Noah come." Sister Agnes reached over and patted his hand. "Sometimes the best way to help someone isn't by reaching out directly, but by creating a space where they can reach out themselves." They worked in comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds, the soft thunk of cans being placed on shelves and the rustle of paper bags being folded. The late afternoon light grew golden, warming the small space. "When were you thinking of having it?" Eli asked finally. 2 weeks from Friday," Sister Agnes replied. "Enough time to spread the word, but not so long that people lose interest. We'll put up some paper cranes for decoration. I hear they're quite meaningful to some folks." She winked at Eli. Maya started humming Amazing Grace as she worked, the melody floating through the pantry like a gentle reminder of hope. Eli found himself smiling despite his worries. "I could help set up the hall," he offered. "Maybe fix that wobbly stage step before then." "And I'll get the choir to perform," Maya added enthusiastically. "We've been practicing this beautiful arrangement of Bridge Over Troubled Water." Sister Agnes beamed at them both. "That's the spirit. Now, who wants to help me sort through these mysterious unlabeled cans? I swear, some people think we have X-ray vision." They spent another hour organizing the pantry. the conversation flowing easily between plans for the potluck and gentle teasing about Sister Agnes's collection of ancient Christmas decorations stored in the corner. They're vintage, dear, not old. As the sun began to set, they locked up the pantry and helped Sister Agnes carry some supplies to her small apartment next to the church. She sent them home with a bag of slightly dented but perfectly good cookies and her trademark bear hug. Back at their apartment, Maya headed to her room to practice her choir music while Eli sat down at the kitchen table. He pulled out a piece of paper and his old sketching pencils, nothing fancy, just the basic tools he used for drawing repair diagrams. In the quiet of the evening, with the sounds of Maya's gentle singing drifting from down the hall, Eli began to draw. His lines were simple but careful as he sketched out the familiar shape of a crane. He added details to the wings, making them strong but gentle. Then, with careful letters, he wrote along one wing, "You belong here." The words weren't fancy or profound, but they were true. He looked at the drawing, thinking about Noah's silent observations, his careful whispers, the way he seemed to fold himself into small spaces like one of his paper birds. Every child deserved to know they belonged, that their voice, whatever form it took, mattered. The kitchen clock ticked softly, marking time in the peaceful moment. The drawing wasn't perfect, but maybe perfect wasn't what was needed. Maybe what was needed was just an open door, a gentle invitation, a chance to unfold wings in safety. The church hall glowed, like a warm sanctuary against the February chill. Eli's breath made little clouds as he carried folding chairs from the storage room, setting them up in neat rows. Above, hundreds of paper cranes swooped and swayed from fishing lines strung between exposed wooden beams, catching the light from mason jar lanterns and borrowed Christmas lights. "Dad, can you move that last row back a bit?" Maya called from the makeshift stage area. She stood with 3 other choir members, shuffling sheet music. "We need more space for the piano." Eli nodded, lifting the metal chairs. "You got it, sweetheart." The legs scraped softly against the old wooden floor as he adjusted them. Sister Agnes had transformed the usually plain space into something magical. Paper stars dotted the walls, and hand-lettered cards with words like hope and courage decorated every corner. The door creaked open, letting in a burst of cold air. Ms. Chen, the art teacher, guided Noah inside with a gentle hand on his shoulder. The boy wore a navy sweater and clutched his sketchbook like a shield. His eyes went wide at the sight of all the paper birds. "Look what someone made for tonight," Ms. Chen said softly, pointing upward. Noah's face softened as he tracked the dancing shadows of the cranes. Maya waved from the stage. "Hi, Noah. Want to hear us practice?" She kept her voice light and easy, the way she always did with him. Noah gave a tiny nod and settled into a front-row chair, still holding his sketchbook close. People began trickling in, teachers, parents, neighborhood folks Sister Agnes had invited. They brought covered dishes and thermoses of coffee, filling the hall with the smell of comfort food and the low hum of conversation. Eli kept busy, directing traffic to the food table and making sure everyone had enough chairs. Testing, testing. Sister Agnes tapped the microphone, her voice warm and steady. "Welcome to our first Voices Potluck. Tonight isn't about performing. It's about being heard, whatever that means for you. Some will sing, some will speak, some will share just one word. All voices matter here." The evening unfolded like a gentle prayer. Mrs. Rodriguez from the corner store read a poem about her grandmother's hands. 2 kindergartners sang Twinkle Twinkle together, giggling when they forgot the words. Mr. Kim, who rarely spoke above a whisper since his stroke, stood up and said, "Family, clear as a bell," making his daughter cry. Noah watched it all, his eyes bright and alert. He drew in his sketchbook as people shared quick, darting lines that captured each moment. When Sister Agnes called his name, he didn't freeze or hide. Instead, he closed his sketchbook carefully and walked to the microphone. Eli slipped behind the stage curtain, heart thundering. This was their plan. Noah knew he'd be there, just out of sight, humming the melody that had become their private signal of safety. The boy adjusted the microphone, which Sister Agnes had lowered for him. The room held its breath. Eli began to hum Amazing Grace, very softly, just loud enough for Noah to hear. The familiar notes floated like invisible birds between them. Noah leaned forward, his lips parting. The microphone caught his whisper, clear as morning light. "Thank you." 2 simple words, but they filled the entire hall. Someone gasped. Then the room erupted in applause, people standing, some wiping tears. Noah didn't run or hide. He stood straight, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Movement at the entrance caught Eli's eye. Vivian Park stood in the doorway, one hand pressed to her lips. She wore her usual sleek business suit, but her careful composure had cracked. Tears ran freely down her face as she watched her son. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, all the tension and warnings fell away. Vivian's chin trembled, and she gave Eli a single, deliberate nod. A truce, wrapped in gratitude. Noah returned to his seat, accepting a gentle high five from Maya as he passed. The evening continued with more songs and stories, but Eli's heart stayed full of those 2 whispered words. After helping clean up, he and Maya walked to their truck through the crisp night air. "That was amazing," Maya said, bumping her shoulder against his arm. "Did you see his face when everyone clapped?" "Sure did." Eli smiled, unlocking the doors. The old truck's engine rumbled to life, heating, fighting against the cold. As they pulled away from the church, the paper cranes in the windows seemed to wave goodbye. Maya fiddled with the radio, finding a station playing soft jazz. "I think Mrs. Park was crying." "Yeah." Eli kept his eyes on the dark road. Sometimes a parent just needs to hear their child's voice. "You did good, Dad." Maya squeezed his arm. "Really good." They drove home under a sky full of stars, both of them humming along to the radio. Eli's heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. For one perfect evening, everything had fallen into place like those paper cranes, dancing in their own kind of quiet grace. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness, leading them home. Maya dozed against the window, and Eli thought about Noah's smile, about Vivian's tears, about the power of 2 whispered words to change everything. Monday afternoon cast long shadows through the basement windows of Brook Hollow Academy. The familiar scent of pine cleaner and damp concrete filled the maintenance corridor as Eli walked toward the staff locker room, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. His mind was still on last night's potluck, replaying Noah's whispered, "Thank you," and the way the room had erupted in joy. He almost missed seeing her. Vivian Park stood beside the metal lockers, her tailored navy suit a stark contrast to the industrial surroundings. She held her leather portfolio like a shield across her chest, her posture rigid but uncertain. "Mr. Walker," her voice was clipped, professional. "Do you have a moment?" Eli slowed his pace, careful to keep a respectful distance. "Of course, Mrs. Park." "About last night." She paused, her perfectly manicured fingers tightening on her portfolio. "I appreciate what you did for Noah. The way you stayed behind the curtain gave him space. That was thoughtful." "Thank you, ma'am." Eli kept his voice gentle, neutral. "But the boundaries we discussed still stand." Her words came faster now, practiced. "Noah is in a delicate place. We need to be careful about." "Sometimes a voice just needs a safe place," Eli said quietly. Not challenging, just stating a simple truth. Vivian's rehearsed speech faltered. She looked down at her portfolio, then at the wall behind Eli, anywhere but his face. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, marking the seconds of silence between them. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer. "There are things you don't understand. About Noah's situation. About Charles Whitmore." Eli waited, giving her space to continue. "Charles isn't Noah's father." The words tumbled out in a rush. "He was my mentor, years ago. When I was starting my company, he believed in my vision when no one else would. He funded my first round of seed money." She took a deep breath. "Noah overheard a heated phone conversation last year. I was arguing with someone who said Charles acted like a father to me, that he never saw me as an equal. Noah, he took it literally. Made connections that weren't there." Eli nodded slowly, understanding blooming. Kids try to make sense of adult words the best way they know how. "Yes." Vivian's shoulders relaxed slightly. And now this misunderstanding has created such a mess. The rumors, the speculation. She pressed her lips together, composing herself. There was someone else. Before. Someone who... Her voice trailed off, but Eli caught the shadow that crossed her face, the way her hand unconsciously moved to her arm, as if warding off an old hurt. Noah used to talk all the time, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. He was so bright, so curious, always asking questions, telling stories. She swallowed hard. Then one night, well, let's just say some people show their true colors when a woman succeeds where they failed. Eli stood quietly, letting her words settle in the dim hallway. He thought of Maya at 7, how small children could seem, how easily their worlds could be shaken. I built walls after that, Vivian admitted. Around Noah, around myself. It was easier to control everything than to risk. She straightened her spine, professional mask sliding back into place. Which is why, Mr. Walker, despite your good intentions... You're good with him, she said softly, cutting herself off. That scares me. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Before Eli could respond, Vivian turned sharply on her heel and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Eli watched her go, understanding now that her previous coldness wasn't just about status or propriety. It was about a mother trying to protect her son the only way she knew how, even if those very protections had become their own kind of cage. He stood there for a long moment after she left, thinking about Noah's drawings of birds with bandaged wings, wondering if they were really self-portraits all along. Monday's revelation. The morning chill clung to Eli's jacket as he walked across Brook Hollow Academy's parking lot. His breath formed small clouds in the crisp air. The sun hadn't quite warmed the frost-covered grass yet, and his work boots left dark impressions on the damp pavement. He spotted Charles Whitmore's sleek black car pull into a nearby spot. The billionaire stepped out, looking less polished than usual in a casual sweater and slacks. Charles raised his hand in greeting, and Eli nodded politely, expecting to continue past. "Mr. Walker," Charles called out, "do you have a moment?" Eli slowed his pace, adjusting the strap of his tool bag. "Of course, sir." Charles walked over, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the asphalt. "I heard about the church potluck," he said, his voice warm. "Sister Agnes mentioned how Noah spoke in front of everyone." "She shouldn't have," Eli started. No, Charles interrupted gently. "I'm glad she did. What you've done for that boy. Your patience with him. It's remarkable." Eli shifted uncomfortably. "I just try to give him space to be himself." Charles glanced around the empty parking lot, then gestured toward a nearby bench. "Would you mind sitting with me for a moment? There are some things you should know." They settled on the cold metal bench, morning dew soaking into their clothes. Charles stared at his clasped hands for a long moment before speaking. "I met Vivian 6 years ago when she was pitching her tech startup," he began. "Brilliant woman, amazing vision. But she was in a relationship that was..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Toxic doesn't begin to cover it." Eli remained silent, listening. A few early arriving teachers hurried past, clutching coffee cups and greeting them with curious glances. Her ex-fiancé, Charles continued, his voice dropping lower, was the jealous type, couldn't handle her success. One night, he showed up at their apartment in a rage. Noah was 4. Eli's hands tightened on his knees. The morning birds seemed too cheerful for such a conversation. The man started throwing things, shoving furniture. Noah hid in a closet while Vivian called the police. Charles rubbed his face. That was the last time anyone heard Noah speak normally. He went completely silent after that night. A delivery truck rumbled past, and Eli watched its reflection in the school's windows. He thought about Noah's drawings. All those birds with bandaged wings. They made more sense now. "I helped Vivian secure funding to restart elsewhere, gave her business guidance," Charles explained. "But we kept it quiet. The tech world can be cruel to women who accept help, especially from male mentors. The rumors," he shook his head, "they never stop." Noah overheard something, Eli said softly, understanding dawning. A phone call where Vivian was defending our professional relationship. She told someone I'd acted like a father figure when she needed support. Charles smiled sadly. Children piece things together in their own way. The morning bell chimed in the distance. Students would start arriving soon, their voices and laughter filling the quiet spaces. She built everything back up, Charles continued. New company, new life. But that fear of losing control, of someone hurting Noah again. He stood up, straightening his sweater. That's why she holds so tight. Eli rose too, adjusting his work bag. The weight of Vivian's story settled on his shoulders, making his usual morning tasks seem smaller somehow. I'm telling you this because you've shown real care for Noah, Charles said. But also because Vivian needs allies who understand. Not just business partners or employees, people who see her as a mother first. Eli nodded, thinking of his own fierce protectiveness toward Maya after her mother passed. Thank you for telling me. Charles hesitated. Be patient with her, too. She's learning to trust again. They walked toward the school entrance together, their footsteps crunching on the frosty grass. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, warming their backs. At the door, Charles held it open. After you, he said with a genuine smile. Eli stepped into the familiar hallway, the scent of floor wax and chalk dust greeting him. His understanding of Vivian's guardedness had shifted, like sunlight through stained glass, same light, different colors. He headed toward the maintenance office, his tool bag heavy with more than just wrenches and cleaning supplies now. He carried the weight of trust, both given and received. Thursday started like any other morning at Brook Hollow Academy. Eli was wiping down the trophy cases near the main entrance when Nadine burst through the front doors, her winter coat still dusted with snow, clutching her phone like it might burn her fingers. Eli! Her voice echoed in the empty hallway. You need to see this. Right now. Eli set down his cleaning cloth, concerned by the urgency in her tone. Nadine's hands shook as she held out her phone. The screen showed a local gossip blog, Brook Hollow Whispers, with a headline that made his stomach drop. Exclusive. Janitor manipulates child to embarrass wealthy donor. What is this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It's everywhere, Nadine said, wringing her hands. All over social media. People are sharing it like crazy. Eli's eyes moved down the screen, each word hitting him like a physical blow. The article painted his quiet moments with Noah as calculated manipulation. His gentle humming became suspicious, grooming behavior. The writer questioned why a janitor would spend so much time around children, suggesting dark motivations behind his amazing grace performances. They found your arrest record, Nadine added softly. There it was, halfway down the article. Sources reveal Walker's criminal past includes arrest during a violent protest. The truth, that he'd participated in a peaceful sit, in advocating for veteran housing rights, was twisted into something unrecognizable. The morning bell rang, startling them both. Students would start filling the halls soon. Principal Romero wants to see you, Nadine said, right away. Eli's feet felt heavy as he walked to the administration wing. The usual morning bustle of teachers preparing for class seemed muted, distant. He noticed several staff members averting their eyes as he passed. In the front office, Ms. Chen, the secretary, gave him a sad look. They're waiting in the conference room, she said quietly. Eli pushed open the heavy wooden door to find Principal Romero, 2 board members, and the school's legal counsel seated around the long table. A copy of the article lay printed in front of each of them. Please, sit down, Mr. Walker, Principal Romero said, his usual warmth noticeably absent. One of the board members, Mrs. Blackwood, cleared her throat. We've called you in regarding some serious allegations that have come to light. Those aren't allegations, Eli said steadily. They're lies. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, shuffled some papers. Nevertheless, the board has a responsibility to investigate any claims that might affect student safety. Your involvement with Noah Park has raised concerns. Involvement? Eli's voice cracked slightly. I fixed a paper crane. I helped a hurt child feel safe enough to speak. The article suggests a pattern of inappropriate attention, Mrs. Blackwood continued. And your undisclosed criminal record. A peaceful protest, Eli interrupted. For veterans housing. 10 years ago. It's in my employment file. Principal Romero wouldn't meet his eyes. Eli, we have to follow procedure. Until this investigation is complete, we're placing you on administrative leave. The words hung in the air like frost. Eli thought of Noah, of the tiny whispered words they'd shared, of paper cranes and chalkbirds on pavement. How long? He asked. Indefinitely, Mr. Peterson replied. We'll need you to clear out your personal items today. Security will escort you. Eli stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. I've never hurt anyone in my life, he said quietly. And I would never hurt these kids. Noah needed someone to see him, that's all. No one responded. The walk to his locker room felt endless. Mike, the security guard who usually shared coffee with him in the mornings, now followed a few steps behind, looking uncomfortable. Eli could hear children's voices from nearby classrooms, the normal rhythm of school life continuing while his world crumbled. He found a small cardboard box in the recycling bin and began emptying his locker. There wasn't much: a spare uniform, his coffee mug, a few tools he'd brought from home. At the back of the shelf, he found one of Noah's drawings, a bird with bandaged wings learning to fly again. The halls were empty as he carried his box toward the exit. No whispered words, no soft footsteps following him. No Noah. The silence felt wrong, like a church with all its candles blown out. Mike held the door open for him. I'm sorry, Eli, he said softly. This isn't right. Eli nodded, unable to speak. The box felt heavier than it should as he walked to his truck, the morning sun now harsh and bright on the snow. Behind him, Brook Hollow Academy stood tall and imposing, its windows reflecting the winter light like cold, unseeing eyes. Somewhere inside, a little boy was learning that sometimes the people who help you find your voice can be forced into silence themselves. The breaking point. The winter evening pressed against the Park Mansion's windows, but inside, the dining room glowed with warm light. Vivian had ordered Noah's favorite Korean takeout, bulgogi and japchae noodles, setting the steaming containers on fine china as if the formal presentation might tempt him to eat. But Noah sat motionless in his chair, head down, hands folded in his lap. Honey, please try just a few bites, Vivian said, her voice gentler than usual. She pushed the plate closer, the sweet savory aroma filling the air between them. Ms. Chen made it extra special for you. Noah turned his face away, his small shoulders rigid. His sketchbook lay untouched beside his plate. The first time in months, he hadn't immediately opened it at the table. Vivian reached across to touch his hand, but he pulled back, sliding lower in his chair. The rejection stung, but she kept her face carefully neutral. Noah, sweetheart, I know things are difficult right now, but... He slid off his chair and walked out of the dining room, his sock feet silent on the hardwood floors. Vivian heard his bedroom door click shut upstairs. Across town, in Eli's modest apartment, Maya paced the small living room while her father sat in his worn armchair, reading glasses perched on his nose as he studied the online article for the 10th time. Dad, you can't just let them say these horrible things about you. Maya's voice cracked with frustration. She grabbed her phone, scrolling furiously. Look at the comments. People who know you are defending you. Mrs. Rodriguez from the cafeteria posted about how you fixed her car last winter. Mr. Chen wrote about how you helped his daughter when she was being bullied. Eli set the paper aside, rubbing his temples. Maya, honey. No, listen. She knelt beside his chair, her eyes fierce. You taught me that standing up for truth matters. That's why you got arrested at that protest. Because veterans deserved better housing. You were right then, and you're right now. Noah needs you. It's not that simple, Eli said softly. Sometimes helping means stepping back. Since when? Maya challenged. She pulled out her phone and played a recording of choir practice. Noah's tiny whisper could be heard underneath the soaring voices, barely there but unmistakable. He's finding his voice, Dad. You can't give up on him now. The evening light was fading when Eli pushed open the heavy wooden doors of St. Michael's Church. Sister Agnes sat in her usual spot near the altar, her rosary beads clicking softly in the silence. She didn't look up as Eli slipped into the pew beside her. "I wondered when you'd come," she said, her weathered hands still moving over the beads. "I don't know what to do, sister." Eli's voice echoed slightly in the empty church. "Everything I tried to build, it's all falling apart." Sister Agnes finally turned to him, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. "Is it? Or is this just the moment when faith matters most?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded paper crane, one of Noah's. "This little boy trusted you when he trusted no one. That's not manipulation, Eli. That's grace." "The board doesn't see it that way," Eli said quietly. "The board sees what's easy to see. God sees what's true." Sister Agnes pressed the crane into his hand. "Remember Job? Everything he built fell apart too. But his faith stayed steady. And in the end, he had more than before." Eli finished. "Mm-hmm," Sister Agnes smiled. "The truth has a way of rising, like cream in coffee. But someone has to keep stirring." In her top-floor office overlooking the city, Vivian sat alone at her desk. The lights of other buildings twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but she barely noticed them. Her attention was fixed on the transfer papers in front of her. The letterhead of Brighton Preparatory Academy gleamed expensively. Their admissions director had been eager to accept Noah mid-semester, a courtesy extended to someone of her position. The school's reputation was impeccable. Their security was top-notch. No one would question her authority there. Vivian's pen hovered over the signature line. In the silence, she could hear Noah's door still firmly shut, imagining him curled up with his sketchbook, drawing birds with broken wings. She thought of his whispered "thank you" at the potluck, how his eyes had shone in the warm light of the paper cranes. The pen scratched across the paper, her signature precise and final. The sound seemed to echo in the empty office like a door closing. She slipped the papers into a manila envelope, wrote Brighton Prep's address in her careful hand, and placed it in her outbox. Then she stood at the window, watching the city lights blur through unshed tears, wondering if safety was worth the price of silence. Down in her office lobby, the cleaning crew worked quietly, their carts squeaking on the polished floors. None of them sang or hummed. None of them fixed the crooked painting in the hallway. None of them noticed the small paper crane that had fallen behind the potted plant, its wing bent but still reaching upward, as if remembering how to fly. The days between. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the apartment complex's courtyard as Eli tightened the last bolt on the broken swing set. His tools clinked against the metal frame, a familiar sound that brought both comfort and an ache to his chest. A week had passed since he'd walked out of Brook Hollow Academy with his small box of belongings, but the weight hadn't lifted. Mrs. Rodriguez from apartment 3B waved from her window. "Thank you, Mr. Walker. The children will be so happy." Eli managed a smile and a nod. He'd been fixing things around the building since dawn: loose doorknobs, squeaky hinges, that temperamental washing machine in the laundry room. Keeping his hands busy helped quiet his mind. Back in his apartment, he made coffee and toast, the kitchen counter spotless from his nervous cleaning. Maya sat at their small table, already dressed for school, her choir folder open beside her breakfast. "Dad," she said, pushing her phone across the table, "I had an idea." Eli picked up the phone, seeing the choir's practice recording of Amazing Grace pulled up on the screen. The familiar melody brought back memories of quiet hallway mornings. "Ms. Chen, you know, the art teacher," she mentioned Noah's been drawing less. Maya's voice softened. "I thought maybe he'd like to hear our version." She said she could pass it along. Eli set the phone down carefully. "You sure that's okay? With everything going on?" "Miss Chen says it's fine if it goes through her. She's worried about him, too." Maya gathered her books, determination in her movements. "Music belongs to everyone, Dad. They can't take that away." That afternoon, Eli stacked cans at Sister Agnes's food pantry, organizing the shelves with the same care he'd once given to the school's supply closets. The sister worked beside him, humming hymns under her breath. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she said, breaking their comfortable silence. "Sometimes the path forward isn't clear until we're halfway down it." Eli nodded, remembering Noah's whispered, "Thank you," at the potluck, how the boy's voice had carried through the church hall like a prayer. "I just hope he's okay." "Faith isn't just about believing," Sister Agnes replied, sorting through donated vegetables. "It's about continuing to act in love, even when we can't see the results." The next morning, Maya burst into the kitchen before school, her face bright. "Ms. Chen texted. Noah's been listening to our recording. She caught him mouthing the words during art class." Eli's heart lifted slightly. He could picture Noah, bent over his sketchbook, silently forming the familiar lyrics. Maybe the music was giving him what Eli no longer could, a safe space to find his voice. The days fell into a new rhythm, mornings fixing things around the building, afternoons at the pantry, evenings helping Maya with homework or listening to her practice for upcoming choir performances. He avoided driving past the school, taking longer routes to the grocery store and church. But Noah's presence lingered in unexpected places. In the paper cranes Maya folded while studying, in the birds that gathered on the apartment's courtyard fence, in the quiet moments before dawn when the world held its breath. On Sunday morning, Eli arrived early to help set up for church service. The autumn air was crisp, leaves skittering across the parking lot. As he approached the side door, something caught his eye, a small shape on the bottom step. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the perfectly folded paper crane. The paper was good quality, the kind used in art class. Tiny musical notes decorated the wings, drawn with careful precision. Eli held the crane gently, remembering another morning, another paper bird, and a whispered word that had started everything. He placed the crane in his shirt pocket, close to his heart, and unlocked the church door. Inside, Sister Agnes was arranging hymnals in the pews. She glanced at Eli's pocket where the crane's wing just peeked out and smiled knowingly. "Sometimes," she said, "the smallest signs carry the biggest messages." Eli touched the crane through his shirt, feeling its delicate edges. Noah might be across town now, in a different school with different hallways, but his voice, in whatever form it took, was still reaching out, still finding its way to be heard. The morning light streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the church floor in colors. Eli began his usual Sunday tasks. The paper crane a reminder that even in silence, some connections couldn't be broken. The digital clock on Vivian's nightstand blinked 2:47 a.m., its red numbers reflecting off the ceiling of her modern bedroom suite. She lay perfectly still, hands folded across her stomach, staring up into the darkness. The house was quiet except for the soft whir of the climate control system, but her mind buzzed with memories. Noah's whispered, "Thank you," from the potluck played over and over, like a song stuck on repeat. The way his small voice had carried through the microphone, tentative but clear. The surge of pride and fear she'd felt, standing in that doorway. And beneath it all, a deeper memory stirred, one she hadn't visited in years. She was 7 again, newly arrived in America, clutching her mother's hand outside their cramped apartment. Mrs. Probling, Chen from next door, a retired teacher, had noticed how Vivian would hide behind her mother whenever anyone spoke English. "Come, little one," Mrs. Pleiss, Chen had said in Mandarin. "We'll practice together. No shame here." Every afternoon for a year, Mrs. Chen had sat with her, patiently working through pronunciation, celebrating each small victory with almond cookies and green tea. "Your voice is a gift," she'd say. "Never let anyone make you feel small for using it." Vivian pushed back her silk covers and padded to Noah's room. He slept peacefully, his sketchbook open beside him. Paper cranes lined his windowsill. He'd been making them constantly since that night at the church. She picked one up, turning it in the dim light from the hallway. The creases were precise, determined. Her phone vibrated on her hip, a late message from her PR team about tomorrow's shareholder meeting. Another carefully crafted statement about maintaining appropriate boundaries and professional standards. The words felt hollow now, like the empty corporate speak she'd learned to wield like armor. Morning came too quickly. Vivian arrived at the Brook Hollow Academy boardroom in her signature power suit, tablet in hand. Parents and investors filled the leather chairs, their whispers falling silent as she entered. She caught fragments of their conversations anyway. That janitor clearly overstepped. Park's reputation to consider. Better schools without such drama. Principal Romero stood at the podium, discussing security updates and policy reviews. Vivian watched the faces around her. Concerned mothers, fathers checking their watches, board members nodding along. They all wanted what was best for their children, she knew. But what did that really mean? Her gaze drifted to the window. From here, she could see the playground where Noah used to watch Eli draw chalkbirds. Her son hadn't spoken a word since the suspension. Each morning, he'd walk to his new classroom with his eyes down, shoulders curved inward like wings folding. "Miss Park?" Romero's voice pulled her back. "Would you like to address the concerns about the recent incidents?" Vivian stood, smoothing her skirt. Her prepared statement sat ready on her tablet, carefully worded paragraphs about maintaining professional distance and protecting children's well-being. Safe words. Corporate words. Empty words. She looked at her reflection in the boardroom's glass wall. She saw herself as Noah must see her, always controlled, always protecting, always afraid. Fear had become her compass, pointing away from every genuine connection, away from the very things her son needed most. Mrs. Chen's voice echoed in her memory. "Your voice is a gift." Vivian set her tablet down. "My son stopped speaking," she began, her voice steady. "After my ex-fiancé broke into our home and destroyed everything he could reach. Noah hid in a closet while I called the police. He hasn't felt safe enough to speak freely since then." The room stilled. Someone's coffee cup clinked against its saucer. "I built walls to protect us both. I thought if I controlled everything, his environment, his interactions, my own image, I could keep him safe. But walls don't just keep danger out. They keep healing out too." She turned to face the parents directly. "Eli Walker didn't manipulate my son. He showed him what safety feels like. He fixed things, named them simply, and asked for nothing in return. My son chose to whisper because, for the first time in years, fear wasn't running his world." Vivian's hands were trembling slightly, but her voice remained clear. "I was wrong to let fear run mine. Wrong to punish a good man for showing kindness. Wrong to think my son's voice would return through perfect control rather than perfect trust." She looked at each board member in turn. "We talk about excellence in education, about preparing our children for success. But what are we teaching them when we punish compassion? When we let fear of liability overcome basic human decency?" The silence in the room felt electric. Vivian reached for her phone, already knowing what she had to do. "Excuse me," she said, standing. "I need to make a call." In the hallway, she pressed Principal Romero's number. When he answered, her voice was firm and clear, like Mrs. Chen had taught her all those years ago. "I'm going to fix this." The school auditorium hummed with tense energy as parents and staff filed in, filling the rows of burgundy seats. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. At the back, reporters from local papers balanced notebooks on their knees, pens poised. Eli sat in the last row, wearing his one good suit, navy blue, slightly worn at the cuffs. Maya squeezed his hand, while Sister Agnes patted his shoulder from the seat behind. The custodial crew had claimed an entire row nearby, their usual work clothes replaced with their Sunday best. Principal Romero stood at the podium, adjusting his tie. "Thank you all for coming to this emergency town hall. We have several announcements regarding recent events that have affected our school community." A rustle of whispers swept through the crowd as Vivian Park strode down the center aisle. Her heels clicked against the hardwood, each step precise and determined. She wore a simple black dress, her usual CEO armor, but something in her bearing had changed. She took the microphone, hands steady. "Good morning. I'm Vivian Park, Noah's mother." Her voice carried clear and strong. "Many of you know me as the CEO of Park Technologies. Today, I'm here as a parent who made mistakes." The whispers died. Even the reporters leaned forward. "My son stopped speaking over a year ago, after a traumatic incident. I responded by trying to control everything around him, his environment, his interactions, the very air he breathed." She paused, allowing a small, self-deprecating smile. "I'm very good at control. It's what made me successful in business, but it's not what my son needed to heal." In the back row, Eli felt Maya's grip tighten. When Eli Walker helped Noah find his voice again, I reacted with fear instead of gratitude. I let others twist a beautiful moment of connection into something suspicious. I stood silent while a good man's reputation was damaged. The room grew so quiet, you could hear the heating system hum. Mr. Walker never sought attention or credit. He simply offered kindness, consistency, and respect, not just to my son, but to every student who crosses his path. He showed Noah that his voice mattered, even when it was just a whisper. Vivian squared her shoulders. Today, I'm announcing the creation of the Hands That Heal Fund. 1 year of my salary will establish a permanent endowment for speech therapy, trauma support, and scholarships for staff families. Because healing doesn't come from silence or control, it comes from community. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then building. Vivian raised her hand for quiet. But that's not all. Charles Whitmore has something to share. Charles rose from his seat in the front row, straightening his expensive suit as he approached the podium. His usual polished demeanor seemed slightly cracked, revealing something raw underneath. "Thank you, Vivian." He cleared his throat. "Many assumed I was hiding something about Noah. They were wrong about that, but right about the hiding." He gripped the podium edges. 28 years ago, I had a daughter out of wedlock. When her mother asked for help, I chose my reputation over responsibility. I've spent decades trying to make up for that cowardice through anonymous philanthropy. A collective intake of breath filled the auditorium. Watching Noah's courage, seeing how Mr. Walker helped him find his voice, it showed me that real redemption requires truth, not just money. Charles's voice wavered slightly. "So today I'm establishing the custodial apprenticeship program in Eli Walker's name, because this man taught us all that true service comes from the heart, not the wallet." Principal Romero stepped forward then, adding his own weight to the moment. "The board has reviewed Mr. Walker's suspension and found it completely without merit. He is hereby reinstated with full back pay." He turned to face Eli directly. "Furthermore, we're creating a new position, Student Support Liaison. Half-time custodial work, half-time mentoring, formalizing the role you've already filled with such grace." The custodial crew erupted in cheers. Maya jumped up, pulling Eli to his feet as the entire auditorium rose in a standing ovation. Sister Agnes wiped tears from behind her glasses. Through the blur of motion and sound, Eli's eyes met Vivian's across the room. Her usual mask of composure had cracked completely, revealing something real and vulnerable. She nodded once, a gesture full of gratitude and respect. Eli nodded back, understanding passing between them. Two people who had learned that sometimes the strongest voice is the one that admits its mistakes. The applause continued to roll through the auditorium like waves, washing away the last traces of suspicion and fear. In that moment, healing wasn't just a possibility. It was already beginning. The Monday morning sun painted the brick walls of Brook Hollow Academy in warm amber tones. Eli Walker sat in his truck for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, taking in the familiar sight of the school he'd missed these past weeks. His old thermal coffee mug, the one with a chip on the rim, steamed in the cup holder. He grabbed his lunch pail and headed for the service entrance, his footsteps echoing in the quiet morning air. The metal door creaked open before he could reach for his keys. "Look who's back!" Nadine's voice boomed as she held the door wide. Behind her, the entire custodial crew had gathered in the small break room. They decorated with a hand-drawn "Welcome Back" banner, complete with cartoon mops and brooms. "We've been waiting since 4:30, Marcus said, pulling Eli into a bear hug that lifted him off his feet. "Some of these floors haven't seen a proper polish since you left." Rosa wiped her eyes with her apron. "The place wasn't the same without you, mi amor." She pressed a warm container into his hands. "Fresh tamales, your favorite." Eli's throat tightened as he looked at their faces. These people who'd become more than coworkers over the years. "Y'all didn't have to do all this." "Sure we did," Nadine said, straightening his collar like a fussy sister. "Besides, your mop bucket was getting lonely." She pointed to his old bucket, freshly cleaned and filled with hot water, a new mop head attached. They walked him to his locker, talking over each other to catch him up on everything he'd missed. The coffee maker that needed fixing, the stuck window in the art room, the squeaky floorboard outside the library that drove Mrs. Chen crazy. And fair warning, Marcus added. The third grade science fair is next week. Last year's volcano incident is still legendary. Eli chuckled, remembering the red food coloring stains that had taken days to remove. He pulled on his work shirt, the familiar fabric feeling like armor. The morning bell hadn't rung yet, but early arrivals were starting to trickle in. Teachers stopped to welcome him back with warm smiles and quick hugs. Even Mrs. Chen, notorious for her strict demeanor, gave him a rare smile and a gentle pat on the arm. Principal Romero found him near the east wing. "Good to have you back, Eli. The place runs better with you here." He handed Eli a new badge that read Student Support Liaison under his name. "Thank you, sir," Eli said, clipping it to his shirt. "Feels good to be home." As he pushed his mop bucket down the familiar hallway, muscle memory took over. The gentle squeak of wheels, the splash of water, the rhythm of the mop. It all felt right. He started humming without thinking, an old army cadence that morphed into Amazing Grace. The sound of quick footsteps made him look up. Noah stood at the end of the hall, his backpack clutched tight against his chest, dark eyes wide and hopeful. For a moment, neither moved. Then Noah ran. He sprinted down the freshly mopped floor, sneakers squeaking, straight toward Eli. His face broke into a rare, full smile as he reached him. "Home," Noah whispered, the word clear and strong. Eli set his mop against the wall and knelt down to Noah's level, his own eyes misty. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the dust motes dancing around them, making the moment feel almost magical. "Always," he whispered back. Behind Noah, Vivian stood in her usual sharp business suit, but her face had softened. She gave Eli a small nod. Acknowledgement, acceptance, maybe even gratitude. Noah took Eli's hand and pressed a folded paper crane into it before heading to his classroom, this time with a spring in his step. The crane was carefully colored in bright blues and greens. Written in careful child's handwriting were the words, "Welcome home." Eli tucked it gently into his pocket, right next to his heart, and picked up his mop. The halls of Brook Hollow filled with the usual morning bustle. Children's laughter, teachers' greetings, lockers clanging, and underneath it all, the quiet whisper of a mop against the floor and a gentle humming that felt like coming home. Principal Romero's office felt different now. The morning light streamed through the window, catching dust motes that danced in the air. Eli sat in the cushioned chair across from the desk, his work shirt freshly pressed. "We're creating a new position," Romero explained, sliding a folder across his desk. "Student Support Liaison. You'll keep your custodial duties in the morning, but afternoons will be dedicated to mentoring." He smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "Basically, we're making official what you've been doing all along." Eli picked up the folder, his calloused hands careful with the crisp paper. "I appreciate this, sir, but I'm just a janitor who changed a boy's life," Romero finished. "And maybe more kids need that kind of change." He leaned forward. "Room 112 is empty. It used to be storage, but we've cleared it out. Make it yours." Over the next few days, Eli transformed room 112. He brought in his old workbench from home, setting up basic tools and supplies. Maya helped him hang cheerful yellow curtains on the windows and arrange comfortable chairs in a circle. They put up a sign that read "Fix-It Club" in bright blue letters. "Dad, it needs something else," Maya said, tapping her chin thoughtfully. She disappeared and returned with her art supplies, painting little birds along the bottom of the sign. "There, now it feels right." Word spread quietly through the school. A sixth grader showed up with a torn backpack strap. "Can you fix it?" she asked shyly. "Let's figure it out together," Eli replied, showing her how to thread the needle and make strong stitches. More students began trickling in. A boy with a wobbly chair leg learned to use wood glue properly. Two friends brought in a broken music box, watching intently as Eli demonstrated how to align the gears. Between repairs, they talked about their days, their worries, their hopes. Noah started appearing after classes, settling into the corner with his sketchbook. He didn't always speak, but his presence was constant. Sometimes he'd point to a tool Eli needed, whispering its name. Other times, he'd help younger students find supplies, communicating through gentle gestures and small smiles. Maya often stopped by after choir practice, filling the room with quiet humming as she did homework. Her natural warmth drew others in, making the space feel more like a cozy living room than a school classroom. One Wednesday afternoon, the Fix-It Club was particularly busy. A group of fourth graders clustered around the workbench, learning to repair a remote control car. Noah sat in his usual spot, but today he was showing a younger student how to draw birds. His whispers, though soft, came more freely now. "Like this," he murmured, demonstrating how to curve the wing just so. Maya perched on a nearby stool, sorting through sheet music. "You're getting really good at teaching, Noah," she said casually, making him duck his head with a pleased expression. Eli worked steadily at his bench, fixing a laptop cooling fan while keeping an eye on everyone. The room hummed with purpose, not just repairs happening, but connections being built, trust growing stronger. Through the door's window, Vivian Park paused in her designer heels, briefcase in hand. She watched silently as Noah leaned toward Maya, pointing at something in her music book. A small laugh escaped him, soft but clear as a bell, at whatever joke Maya had just told. The sound made Vivian's eyes go soft. She stood there a moment longer, taking in the scene. Her son, no longer isolated in his silence, surrounded by the gentle chaos of creation and repair. Her son learning to be heard in his own way, in his own time. Eli noticed her but didn't draw attention. He simply continued working, giving her space to witness this quiet miracle, the transformation of a storage room into a sanctuary, of silence into possibility, of broken things into whole ones. The morning sun streamed through the high windows of Brook Hollow Academy's auditorium, catching the rainbow prisms from hundreds of paper cranes suspended from the ceiling. Each one had been carefully repaired, their creases smoothed and wings strengthened. They swayed gently in the air conditioning, casting dancing shadows across the gathered faces below. Eli stood at the back of the packed room, his hands clasped behind him. He traded his usual work clothes for a clean blue button-down shirt that Maya had helped him pick out. His daughter had insisted on ironing it twice that morning, teasing him about looking fancy for once. Now she stood with the choir on risers near the stage, her eyes bright with excitement as she adjusted her music folder. The usual assembly chatter filled the air, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation today. Parents filled the back rows, teachers lined the walls, and even the custodial staff had front row seats. A new policy that still made Eli's throat tight with gratitude. Principal Romero approached the podium, tapping the microphone. "Good morning, Brook Hollow family," he said, his voice warm and steady. The room gradually quieted. Today is about celebrating voices. All kinds of voices. In the front row, Vivian Park sat straight-backed in her designer suit, her hands folded carefully in her lap. Next to her, Noah wore a crisp white shirt and dark pants, his small fingers tracing patterns on the program in his hands. Eli watched as Vivian leaned down to whisper something that made Noah's lips twitch into a slight smile. The choir began assembling on the risers. Maya caught Eli's eye and gave him a quick wink as she took her place. The piano introduction began, soft and reverent, and the familiar notes of Amazing Grace filled the space. The choir's voices rose in perfect harmony, and Eli felt his chest tighten with pride watching Maya sing. As the first verse ended, Principal Romero returned to the microphone. "Sometimes," he said, "finding our voice takes time. Sometimes it takes help. And sometimes," he smiled toward the front row, "it takes a whole community." Vivian stood then, smooth and graceful, extending her hand to Noah. The boy took it, rising slowly. Together they walked toward the stage steps, their footsteps echoing in the hushed auditorium. The paper cranes above seemed to turn their faces toward the movement, watching. At the bottom of the steps, Vivian knelt down, her expensive suit touching the floor without hesitation. She turned Noah to face her, and though her back was to the audience, everyone could see the gentleness in her posture. The microphone picked up her whispered words, clear and tender. "Your voice is your gift." Noah's eyes, wide and solemn, fixed on his mother's face. Then he looked up at the hovering paper cranes, at Maya's encouraging smile, at the familiar faces of his classmates. Finally, his gaze found Eli at the back of the room, and something steady and sure passed between them. With his mother's hand still clasped in his, Noah walked to the microphone. The piano began again, softer this time, a gentle invitation. Maya's choir hummed the introduction, creating a cushion of sound that seemed to wrap around the small boy like a blanket. For a moment, Noah just breathed, his chest rising and falling. The room held its collective breath with him. Then, clear as morning light, strong as truth, his voice rose. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." The words filled the auditorium, pure and perfect. Maya's eyes welled with tears even as she kept humming the harmony. Several teachers dabbed at their faces with tissues. In the front row, Sister Agnes closed her eyes in silent prayer, her hands clasped tight. The applause started before Noah finished the line. Spontaneous, joyful, overwhelming. It rolled through the room like thunder, like revelation, like love made audible. Students jumped to their feet, parents called out encouragement, and through it all, Noah stood steady, his mother's hand in his face glowing with something that looked like freedom. Vivian's composure cracked then, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. She looked toward the back of the room, seeking out Eli with an expression of such raw gratitude it made his own vision blur. Without hesitation, she reached out her other hand toward him. Eli moved forward through the standing crowd, past the sound of sniffling and cheering, past the boundaries that had once seemed so rigid and important. When he reached the stage, Vivian's hand found his, squeezing tight. They stood there together, CEO and custodian, mother and father, united in the miracle of a child's voice set free. Above them, the paper cranes continued their slow dance, wings open, ready for flight. Late autumn sunlight filtered through the newly installed windows of room 112, now known as the Hands That Heal room. The space had undergone a remarkable transformation from its former life as a storage area. Warm yellow paint brightened the walls, while comfortable chairs in various sizes clustered around small tables. Wooden shelves lined with books, art supplies, and repair tools created cozy nooks throughout the room. A large work table dominated one corner, its surface scarred but clean, ready for fixing broken items and mending hearts. Eli arranged the last of the donated art supplies on a shelf, carefully organizing markers by color. The room smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. A string of paper cranes, carefully crafted by Maya's choir group, danced along the windows, casting delicate shadows across the floor. The door creaked open hesitantly. A small girl named Sarah peeked in, clutching a stuffed rabbit with a dangling arm. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she managed a tiny smile when she saw Eli. "Come on in," Eli said softly, gesturing to the work table. "Want to see if we can help your friend?" Sarah nodded, patting across the room in her mismatched socks. She placed the rabbit carefully on the table as if it were made of glass. Eli pulled up 2 chairs, making sure to give her plenty of space. "What's your rabbit's name?" he asked, opening his repair kit. "Hoppy," Sarah whispered, so quietly it was almost inaudible. It was the first word she'd spoken at school since her parents' divorce 3 months ago. Noah, who had been quietly drawing in his favorite corner, looked up with interest. He'd claimed the spot by the window as his own, complete with a small desk and a view of the courtyard where birds often gathered. His latest drawing showed a cardinal with musical notes floating from its beak. Eli threaded a needle with strong thread that matched the rabbit's fur. "Would you like to help me hold Hoppy while I fix his arm?" Sarah nodded again, scooting her chair closer. Her small fingers steadied the stuffed animal while Eli worked, explaining each step in gentle tones. "See how we match the stitches to his fur pattern? That way, it'll be extra strong." Other children began filtering in as the afternoon progressed. A 4th grader with a broken calculator sat down near Noah, who shifted his drawings to make room. 2 sisters who hadn't spoken since their mother's illness came to read in the cushioned window seat, occasionally whispering words to each other behind their books. Noah set aside his drawing and walked over to watch Eli work. He picked up a spool of thread, turning it in his hands. "Blue," he said clearly, showing it to Sarah, who looked up in surprise. "Like the sky," she replied, her voice growing slightly stronger. Eli smiled, keeping his eyes on his careful stitches as the children continued their quiet exchange of colors and words. The room filled with soft murmurs, like a gentle stream finding its way between stones. A boy with a torn backpack arrived next, followed by a girl clutching a broken necklace clasp. Each found their place in the room's peaceful atmosphere. Some worked with Eli at the repair table, while others drew, read, or simply sat quietly, soaking in the safety of the space. Noah returned to his drawing, but this time he pulled his chair closer to where a younger student was attempting to fold a paper crane. Without speaking, he demonstrated the folds, his hands moving with careful precision. The other child followed along, concentration etched on his face. The afternoon light shifted, painting golden rectangles across the floor. Eli finished securing the last stitch on Hoppy's arm and tied it off neatly. "There we go. Want to test it out?" Sarah gently hugged her rabbit, a real smile breaking across her face. "Thank you," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Several children looked up, offering encouraging smiles. Noah added the finishing touches to his bird drawing, a musical staff curling around its wings. He walked over and showed it to Sarah, who was still cradling her repaired rabbit. "For Hoppy," he whispered, carefully tearing the page from his sketchbook. Eli watched the exchange, his heart full. Around him, the room hummed with quiet activity. Two boys worked together to repair a model airplane, their previous silence forgotten in their shared focus. The sisters by the window had moved their chairs closer together, taking turns reading aloud in soft voices. The Hands That Heal room had become exactly what they'd hoped, a safe harbor where broken things and silent voices could find their way to wholeness. Children who hadn't spoken in weeks or months found words again, offering them like precious gifts to others who understood. Eli gathered some scattered crayons, straightened a pile of books, and observed the peaceful scene. The late afternoon sun caught the paper cranes, making them glow like stained glass. Noah had started a new drawing, this time with another student beside him, their heads bent together over the paper as they shared a box of colored pencils. In every corner of the room, healing was happening in its own quiet way. Some through words, some through art, some through the simple act of fixing what was broken. Eli felt the rightness of it settle in his chest. This room, these children, this moment of profound contentment. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the church's stained glass windows, painting Sister Agnes's food pantry in warm shades of amber and blue. Vivian Park's heels clicked against the old wooden floor as she carried a large cardboard box filled with the scent of fresh dumplings. Noah walked beside her, clutching a smaller container to his chest, his dark eyes bright with anticipation. "Something smells absolutely heavenly," Sister Agnes called from behind the counter, her weathered face crinkling into a welcoming smile. She adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and peered into the boxes as Vivian set them down. "Ah, your famous dumplings. The regulars will be overjoyed." Noah carefully placed his box next to his mother's and whispered, "I helped fold them." His voice, though soft, carried clearly in the quiet space. "Did you now?" Sister Agnes winked at him. "That explains why they look so perfect." Vivian smoothed her silk blouse, noticeably less formal than her usual corporate attire, and rolled up her sleeves. "Where do you need us, sister?" "Let's set up at the serving counter." Sister Agnes gestured toward the long table near the entrance. "The after-school crowd will be here soon." As they arranged the food, regular visitors began trickling in. Many were familiar faces, elderly neighbors who lived alone, struggling single parents, and a handful of teenagers who came for both food and conversation. The church pantry had become more than just a place for meals. It was a gathering spot where dignity and kindness were served in equal measure. Noah stood on a step stool behind the counter, carefully placing dumplings on paper plates while Vivian ladled hot soup beside him. His movements were precise and deliberate, making sure each serving looked just right. "3 dumplings, please," said Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly regular who always brought hand-knitted scarves during winter. Noah nodded seriously and selected 3 perfect specimens. "Thank you, sweetheart," Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. Noah's response was a small but genuine smile that reached his eyes. Vivian watched her son interact with the visitors, amazed at how naturally he moved through these exchanges. Here, Among the simple act of serving others, his silence felt less like a wall and more like a gentle presence. During a quiet moment, Sister Agnes joined Vivian at the counter. "You know," she said, folding napkins with practiced efficiency, "I remember when you first started coming here. Always in a rush, dropping off checks, but never staying." Vivian felt her cheeks warm. "I was different then. I thought writing checks solved problems. I thought control meant safety." She watched Noah carefully arrange more dumplings on a tray. "I'm learning there's strength in letting go sometimes." Sister Agnes nodded. "Control is like holding water. The tighter you squeeze, the more slips through your fingers." She patted Vivian's hand. "But look at you now, up to your elbows in dumpling sauce and looking happier than I've ever seen you." "I am happier," Vivian admitted, surprising herself with how true it felt. "Noah is too. He's teaching me more than I ever taught him about what really matters." A young mother approached with twin toddlers, looking exhausted but grateful. Noah immediately picked out extra dumplings for the children, adding a few more when he saw their eyes light up. "More?" he whispered to them, and they nodded enthusiastically. Vivian felt her throat tighten with emotion. Just months ago, such interactions would have seemed impossible. She remembered the countless therapy sessions, the specialists, the well-meaning but frustrated teachers. All along, what Noah had needed was simply safe spaces and patient hearts. The afternoon continued with a steady stream of visitors. Noah worked tirelessly, his movements becoming more confident with each serving. He even began humming softly, a tune that sounded suspiciously like Amazing Grace as he worked. Around 5 o'clock, the door opened and Eli walked in, carrying several empty crates. His janitor's uniform was dusty from the day's work, but his smile was bright as ever. "Sister Agnes said you might need help with the pantry loading," he said, setting down the crates. "Perfect timing," Sister Agnes called from the back. "We just got a delivery of canned goods that needs organizing." Noah immediately perked up at Eli's arrival, abandoning his post to help with the crates. Together, they created an efficient system. Eli would hand items to Noah, who would tell him in whispered words where each belonged, while Vivian recorded the inventory. "Soup," Noah whispered, pointing to the top shelf. "You got it, buddy," Eli replied, passing him the cans one by one. Vivian watched their easy interaction, remembering how she'd once feared it. Now she understood. Eli's quiet strength had never been a threat, but a gift, showing Noah that gentlemen existed in the world. Sister Agnes appeared beside them with a fresh pot of coffee. "Would anyone like a cup? These old bones need a break." They gathered around the small table in the corner, steam rising from their mugs into the golden late afternoon light. Noah sat between Vivian and Eli, contentedly drawing birds on a spare napkin while the adults talked. "You've created something special here," Vivian said to Sister Agnes, gesturing around the pantry. "It's more than just food." Sister Agnes smiled. "That's because everyone who comes here brings something of themselves to share. Like your dumplings, they're not just food, they're your heritage, your love for Noah, your willingness to serve others. That's what makes this place heal." Eli nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Just like at school, the Fix-It Club isn't really about broken things. It's about making space for kids to feel safe enough to be themselves." "Exactly," Sister Agnes agreed. And speaking of fixing things, she produced a small box from under the counter. The office clock stopped working again. "Noah, would you and Eli take a look?" Noah's eyes lit up as Eli spread out his toolkit. Together, they bent over the clock, Eli naming each tool as Noah handed them over, their quiet collaboration, a dance of trust and understanding. Vivian sipped her coffee, letting the peaceful moment wash over her. She thought about the controlling CEO she'd been just months ago, so afraid of showing weakness that she'd nearly missed seeing her son's strength. Now here they were, spending their Friday afternoons making dumplings for strangers and fixing clocks with the janitor who'd helped her son find his voice. The sound of Noah's whispered screwdriver brought her back to the present. She watched as he carefully passed the tool to Eli, their movements synchronized through practice and mutual respect. The autumn breeze rustled through the maple trees outside Brook Hollow Academy as students filtered out of their last classes. Inside the Fix-It Club room, Warm light spilled through the windows, catching dust motes that danced above workbenches and shelves lined with tools. The space smelled of wood shavings and fresh paint, a comfortable mix that had become familiar to the small group gathered there. Eli Walker stood at the main workbench, carefully sanding rough edges from an old wooden birdhouse. The weathered structure had seen better days. Its roof sagged slightly, and patches of its once bright paint had faded to dull patches. But Eli saw potential in broken things. He always had. See here? He demonstrated for the 3 students gathered around him, moving the sandpaper in smooth, even strokes. You want to go with the grain of the wood, not against it. Gentle but firm. Noah Park sat closest, perched on a tall stool, watching with characteristic intensity. His dark eyes followed every movement of Eli's hands. Though he didn't speak, his focus said everything about his interest. Next to him, Katie Chen and Marcus Rodriguez took turns practicing on spare pieces of wood. "Mr. Walker," Katie piped up, "why does it matter which way we sand?" "Good question." Eli picked up a scrap piece and demonstrated the difference. "Going against the grain can leave scratches, but working with it?" He ran the sandpaper smoothly along the board. "That brings out the wood's natural beauty." Marcus raised his hand, then remembered he didn't need to. "Like how my mom always brushes my sister's hair one way to keep it neat." "Exactly like that," Eli smiled, setting down his tools. "Now, who wants to help prep this house for painting?" All 3 students raised their hands, but Noah shot up first, something that still made Eli's heart warm, remembering the shy boy who once couldn't even make eye contact. They worked together, each taking a section. Katie handled the back wall, Marcus worked on the sides, and Noah focused intently on removing old paint from the front, where a small circular entrance hole welcomed future feathered residents. "Remember," Eli advised, moving between them, "we're not trying to make it perfect. Birds don't mind if their home has a little character." The students worked steadily, the room quiet except for the soft scratch of sandpaper and the distant calls of actual birds outside. Eli noticed Noah periodically glancing at the yellow paint they'd mixed earlier, his expression hopeful but hesitant. After they finished sanding, Eli brought out drop cloths and spread them across the workbench. "Time for the fun part," he announced, setting out brushes and the paint they'd chosen. "Noah, since you picked the color, would you like to start with the roof?" Noah nodded eagerly, carefully picking up a brush. His movements were precise as he dipped it into the cheerful yellow paint. The other students watched as he made his first careful stroke across the roof panel. "That's looking mighty fine," Eli encouraged, noting how Noah's shoulders relaxed at the praise. "Katie, Marcus, want to work on the sides while Noah handles the roof?" The next half hour passed in focused activity. Katie chose a soft blue for the walls, while Marcus added white trim around the entrance hole. Noah remained absorbed in his task, meticulously covering every inch of the roof in sunny yellow paint. His tongue poked out slightly in concentration, a new habit that always made Eli smile. When they finished, the birdhouse looked transformed. The yellow roof gleamed like a slice of sunshine, contrasting beautifully with the blue walls and white accents. They stood back to admire their work. "Now that," Eli said proudly, "is what I call a proper home for our feathered friends." Katie and Marcus high-fived each other, but Noah remained still, studying the birdhouse with an intensity that Eli had come to recognize. The boy was working up to something. After Katie and Marcus had packed up their things and headed out, Noah stayed behind, fidgeting with his paintbrush. Eli busied himself cleaning up, giving the boy space to find his words. Finally, Noah took a deep breath. "Mr. Walker?" His voice was soft but clear, a sound that never failed to amaze Eli. "Yes, Noah?" "Could we?" Noah paused, gathering courage. "Could we hang it outside the Hands That Heal room?" Eli set down the brush he was cleaning and turned to face Noah fully. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Why there?" Noah's fingers traced invisible patterns on the workbench. Because that's where people come to feel better. Like birds coming home." The simple wisdom in those words caught in Eli's throat. He nodded, not trusting his voice for a moment. "You're absolutely right. Should we hang it up now?" Noah's face lit up with a smile that reached his eyes. He nodded enthusiastically. Together, They gathered their supplies, a drill, screws, and a sturdy mounting bracket Eli had prepared earlier. They carried the birdhouse carefully through the halls, now quiet in the late afternoon light. Outside the Hands That Heal room, a perfect spot waited. A sturdy oak branch extended just above eye level, visible from the room's windows. Eli helped Noah hold the birdhouse steady while he secured it to the branch. The yellow roof caught the slanting sunlight, making it seem to glow. When they stepped back, Noah reached out and gently patted the wooden side of the house. "Home," he whispered, and the word carried all the weight of understanding that sometimes the smallest gestures made the biggest difference. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Brook Hollow Academy's boardroom, casting long shadows across the polished oak table. Vivian Park adjusted her navy blazer. Not the power suit she typically wore as CEO, but something softer, more approachable. She'd chosen it deliberately for her first meeting as a parent volunteer. Board members filed in, some casting curious glances her way. Just months ago, she'd sat at the other end of this table, armored in corporate authority. Now she took a seat among the parent volunteers, next to Mrs. Chen from the PTA and Mr. Rodriguez, who coached soccer. Principal Romero called the meeting to order, shuffling through his agenda. First item, Staff Inclusion Initiatives. Mrs. Park has some thoughts to share. Vivian stood, her hands steady on her notes. Thank you. As both a parent and business leader, I've learned that the best solutions come from all levels of an organization. She paused, thinking of Noah's paper cranes. Our custodial staff, cafeteria workers, and support personnel interact with our children daily. They see needs we might miss from behind our desks. Down the hall, the sounds of Maya's choir practice drifted through the building. Amazing Grace again. It had become something of an unofficial school anthem. The familiar melody gave Vivian strength as she continued. I'm proposing quarterly town halls where all staff members can voice concerns and ideas. Additionally, we should have staff representatives on our planning committees. She laid out the details: scheduling accommodations, modest stipends for extra time, childcare during meetings. Mrs. Whitaker, one of the more traditional board members, frowned. This seems rather unconventional. So was having a janitor help my son find his voice, Vivian replied quietly. Sometimes unconventional works. The choir's voices swelled in perfect harmony, and through the boardroom windows, Vivian could see Eli working with a student near the courtyard. They were perched on a maintenance ladder, and Eli was carefully demonstrating proper technique for changing a light fixture. Watch your balance there, Kevin. Eli's voice carried faintly through the glass. Steady hands make safe work. The student, a sophomore who'd been struggling with anxiety, nodded intently. Under Eli's patient guidance, he successfully removed the old bulb and secured the new one. When the light flickered on, Kevin's face lit up brighter than the fixture itself. Look at that, Vivian gestured to the scene. That's not just maintenance happening out there. That's mentorship. That's confidence building. We have hidden resources in every corner of this school, if we're wise enough to recognize them. The choir transitioned to a new song, something uplifting about community and belonging. Maya's clear soprano carried the melody, and other students in the courtyard paused to listen. Even Kevin and Eli stopped their work for a moment, enjoying the impromptu concert. I've prepared a detailed proposal, Vivian continued, passing out folders, including budget implications and implementation timelines. But the real value isn't in these numbers. It's in the connections we'll build. She watched as board members paged through the materials. Sister Agnes, recently appointed to the board as community liaison, nodded approvingly. When we break down walls between people, we make room for grace to flow, she said softly. Principal Romero leaned forward. I think Mrs. Park raises excellent points. We've already seen positive changes from our Hands That Heal initiative. More inclusive decision-making feels like a natural next step. The discussion continued, with questions about logistics and concerns about precedent. But Vivian noticed the tone had shifted from skepticism to genuine consideration. Even Mrs. Whitaker was making thoughtful notes. Outside, Eli and Kevin had finished with the light fixture and were gathering their tools. Maya's choir wrapped up their practice, and students began crossing the courtyard in small groups, calling greetings to each other and to the staff they passed. "One final thought," Vivian said, gathering her papers. "When I first came to this school, I saw titles and hierarchies. Now I see a community. Let's build on that." The board voted to implement a pilot program for staff inclusion. As members filed out, Sister Agnes touched Vivian's arm. "You've come a long way from the CEO, who used to send emails instead of attending meetings in person." Vivian smiled, watching through the window as Eli showed Kevin how to properly store the ladder. "We all have. That's the point, isn't it?" She made her way downstairs and out to the courtyard, where the late morning sun had warmed the brick paths. Students sat in small groups on benches, some doing homework, others just talking. Maya's choir friends were still humming their songs as they headed to their next classes. From across the open space, Vivian watched Eli giving Kevin a fist bump for their successful repair job. Her son's quiet voice had led to so many others finding theirs, whether through words, music, or simple acts of service. The school felt warmer now, more connected. Less like an institution and more like a second home. When Eli finished with Kevin, he noticed Vivian standing there. He gave her a small wave, which she returned with a soft smile. This wasn't the life she'd planned when she'd first enrolled Noah at Brook Hollow Academy. It was better, messier perhaps, less controlled, but infinitely richer in all the ways that mattered. The morning bell chimed, and students began moving toward their classrooms. Vivian watched Eli heading off to his next task, tool belt jingling slightly as he walked. In her business career, she'd learned that success often looked different than expected. Sometimes it wore a custodian's uniform and carried a toolbox full of quiet miracles. Late spring, sunshine poured through the Fix-It Club's windows, painting golden rectangles across the worn linoleum floor. The afternoon light caught dust motes dancing in the air, making them sparkle like tiny stars. At his workbench, Eli Walker carefully tightened the last screw on a student's broken desk lamp, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision. The room smelled of wood polish and fresh paint, with hints of the jasmine blooming outside the window. Various projects lined the shelves, half-mended toys, books waiting for new spines, and a collection of origami birds perched along the windowsill. Each paper crane marked a milestone, a whispered word, a moment of trust built between a quiet janitor and the children who found sanctuary here. Maya's choir practice drifted down the hallway, their voices carrying fragments of Amazing Grace through the open door. The familiar melody wrapped around the room like a warm blanket, mixing with the gentle whir of the ceiling fan and the distant sounds of children playing outside. Eli set down his screwdriver and stretched, his joints creaking slightly. He glanced at the clock, almost time for the afternoon dismissal bell. That's when he noticed Noah standing in the doorway, hands clasped behind his back, watching with those observant eyes that seemed to catch every detail. The boy had changed since that first whispered "bird" in the pre-dawn hallway. His shoulders no longer hunched forward as if carrying an invisible weight. His steps were lighter, more sure. Even his school uniform seemed to fit better, though it hadn't changed. It was Noah himself who stood taller now. "Hey there, buddy," Eli said softly, wiping his hands on his work apron. "Come to check on our birdhouse?" Noah shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He took 3 careful steps forward, his sneakers squeaking against the floor. From behind his back, he produced something small and white, a paper bird, but different from the others they'd made together. This one was crafted with extra care, each fold precise and deliberate. Noah had drawn on it with colored pencils, adding delicate details that transformed the simple origami into something magical. The bird's wings spread wide, as if caught mid-flight, and its beak, Eli noticed with a catch in his throat, was open wide in song. Tiny musical notes spilled from the drawn beak, each one carefully shaded in blue and purple. They swirled across the paper in a joyful cascade, like visible pieces of melody taking flight. Some notes were large and bold, others small and delicate, but together they told a story of silence transformed into song. Noah held the bird out in both hands, like an offering. Sunlight caught the paper, making the drawn notes seem to dance. His eyes met Eli's, steady and clear. so different from the frightened gaze that had watched from shadows all those months ago. Eli knelt down, bringing himself to Noah's level, the way he had that first morning with the tangled mobile. The boy stepped closer, bare knees showing beneath his uniform shorts, one sock slightly crooked. With gentle reverence, Noah pressed the paper bird into Eli's weathered palm. Their hands touched briefly, small fingers against calloused ones. And in that moment, Noah whispered, "Fly." The word carried all the magic of that first bird, but now it rang with confidence, with joy, with trust freely given. It wasn't just a word anymore. It was a gift, a thank you, a celebration of how far they'd both come. Eli felt tears welling up in his eyes as he carefully cradled the paper bird. He thought of all the quiet moments that had led here. Chalk drawings on pavement, whispered tool names, shared lunches in comfortable silence. He thought of Maya's songs and Sister Agnes's wisdom, of Vivian's courage and Charles's honesty. He thought of how healing happened not in grand gestures, but in small acts of kindness, repeated day after day. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep in his chest, not from humor, but from pure joy. It mixed with the tears in his eyes, creating something that felt like grace made visible. "Already am," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. Noah's smile widened, reaching all the way to his eyes. The afternoon sun caught his face, highlighting the sprinkling of freckles across his nose and the slight gap where he'd lost a baby tooth last week. He looked like any other 7-year-old in that moment, which was perhaps the greatest miracle of all. Through the window, children's laughter rang out from the schoolyard. The sound carried clearly into the Fix-It Club, accompanied by the rhythmic squeak of swing sets and the thump of basketballs on pavement. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the oak tree outside, making patterns of light and shadow dance across the floor. The birdhouse they'd built together swayed slightly in that same breeze, its bright yellow roof catching the sun. A real chickadee perched on its entrance, tilting its head as if listening to the laughter below. Then it took wing, soaring past the window in a flash of feathers and freedom. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Eli Walker, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.